Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran, and here I am fresh from my 10-part series on the Chalukyas. A trifle saddened though, they were beginning to grow on me. Fascinating bunch of people. Barring one king, Vijayaditya, under whom the kingdom was most peaceful, most cultured, prosperous and seemingly happy, it looked like the Chalukyas could not tolerate peace, and they repeatedly provoked war. Indeed, the peace during Vijayaditya's time, call it an absence of war between the Chalukyas and Pallavas if you like, caused the growth of culture in both these great kingdoms of the Deccan. And for all their enmity, the two were more similar than they were different. In the evidence that lies before us today in the form of architecture and the fine arts, music, literature and art, the arc of such developments followed similar patterns. Scholars like Dandin spent considerable time in both kingdoms, for example. Evidence of Chalukyan styles and methods of architecture can be found in Pallava temples and Pallava methods in Chalukyan architecture. The cultural bonds, of course, run much deeper than design inspiration, and it wasn't also merely based on religion. The feud between these empires was more like a family spat, such as between cousins who were raised together. And indeed, matrimonial alliances were common among the dynasties across the south, and as one can imagine, among all the people. The warring enemies, the Pallavas, the Nolambas, the Banas on the one side, and the Chalukyas, the Pandyas, the Gangas and the others on the other, were not incompatible in culture and tradition in the same way that the Chalukyas and the Arab Tajika may have been. Indeed, it would have been difficult to distinguish between the troops of the armies of the Deccan, the Rashtrakutas, Chalukyas, Gangas, Pallavas, Pandyas, Cholas, and many of the Telugus, for instance. They all pretty much looked the same. These regions were, and continued to be, composed of people who speak the languages of all these regions, Kannada, Telugu, and Tamil, and all with very similar customs. So traders, farmers, artisans, and others went where there was opportunity, and there were no national boundaries to stop them from relocating whenever they chose. For example, the farmlands around Kanchipuram saw a number of people who were Morosu Bokkaligas. They were from the area around Tirupati and they were trilingual. They spoke Telugu, but also Kannada and Tamil. It was a group of farmers from this community who, sometime in the 13th century, migrated to Kolar and then to the Nandidurga area. And they were the ancestors of Kempe Gowda, who founded Bengaluru. If you're interested in the story of their migration, listen to the very first episode of this podcast titled How Kempe Gowda's Ancestors Came to Bangalore. Now, this is only one example of the multilingual, multicultural communities who populated the Deccan region and continue to. The trade overseas and the coast-to-coast inland trade routes were made what Bangalore region so desirable geographically, and became a hub for people from everywhere in the world to meet. Indeed, the wealth of the Deccan came from this plurality. And all of this didn't happen overnight, nor in a peaceful manner. Wealth attracts violence, and the history of the region is nothing if not an endless tale of war and bloodshed, starting with the inception of the Gangas and continuing through to the British, who held Bangalore until independence in 1947. So we are at the point in the 8th century of the end of one dynasty, the Chalukyas, and the rise of their conquerors, the Rashtrakutas. The history of the Rashtrakutas and the Gangas and their relationships with the Tamil kingdoms of the Pallavas and the others in the Mysore Deccan are interesting, where enmities and friendships coexisted in a mixed bag of political expediency. And the strangest of them all is that the coronation of one of the kings, Shivamara II, was conducted by none other than a prince of the Pallavas, sworn enemies of the previous 2 centuries and combatants in a parade of wars. These are wonderful facts to learn, even more fun to recount, which I will do as soon as I pause to acknowledge that this journey is made possible thanks to the support of the Prestige Group. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future Simply add prestige to your life. So we are in the middle of the 8th century, as medieval as it can be, when the fierce leader of the Rashtrakutas, the king Danti Durga, had planned to overthrow the Chalukyas. Part of his plan would have been to turn all the feudatories of the Chalukyas to his side, presumably convincing them of the promise that he would be the next overlord of the Deccan. Now, such a plan could not have been executed overnight. It would have taken years. So we can narrow down this period to between 739 AD, when he had fought the Arabs at Navasari alongside Avani Janashraya Pulakeshin and received great praise from Vikramaditya II, and 753 AD, when he defeated Kirtivarman and became the master of the Deccan. Now, the reports of the apathy, despondency, and depression of the Chalukya kings of Vikramaditya and Kirtivarman could easily be explained by what they saw as the inevitability of the Rashtrakutas. Meanwhile, in the Ganga capital of Talakadu, all this could only have seemed completely dismal to their king, Sri Purusha. For centuries, the Gangas and the Chalukyas had been joined at the hip. They were friends, allies, overlord and favorite feudatories, in-laws, a deep and tight relationship, and thus began the Ganga dynasty's troubles with the Rashtrakutas. So when Danti Durga had overthrown the last Chalukya, Kirtivarman, in 753 AD, he had left him in place in Vatapi to rule over whatever was left of the kingdom and boss over such of the feudatories that Danti Durga really didn't care about. Then Danti Durga died around 3 years later, say 756 AD, some say 758. Childless and therefore without a natural heir and no siblings, he was succeeded to the throne by his uncle, Krishna I. Now, Krishna's preoccupation was very different from Danti Durga's. He was impatient and he wanted to expand the empire and bring as much land under his control as he could. Following the glory of the Chalukyas, Danti Durga would have spent his time marshalling his forces to defeat them so that he could legitimately establish the Rashtrakuta supremacy. So following him, Krishna I could devote his efforts and time to becoming a kingdom as large, if not better, than the Vatapi Chalukyas. So when Kirtivarman had the misguided judgment of thinking that he could take advantage of Danti Durga's death, Krishna took the opportunity to march against him, kill him, and obliterate the Vatapi Chalukyas from further reckoning. And this was probably in 757 AD, the last year of the reign of the last Chalukya king, Kirtivarman II. One Rashtrakuta inscription described victory as, "He, the most mighty one, a very lion of a king, transformed into a deer, the great boar." The great boar is a reference to the Varaha, or the wild boar, the Chalukyan emblem or mascot. Taming the great boar was not enough. There was one incomplete piece on the map, and this was the Ganga kingdom, or the Gangavadi. The king of the Gangas, Sri Purusha, was not known as one of the most significant rulers of the Ganga dynasty for nothing. Listen to my earlier episode devoted to this ruler. It's part 5 of my series on the Gangas, and it's titled Sri Purusha, the Golden King of the Gangas. In summary, Sri Purusha was wise and resourceful, and he had organized the affairs of the kingdom such that there was this balance between military strength and good administration, the holy grail of all administrations in all of history. There was such abundance during Sri Purusha's time that the kingdom came to be known as Sri Rajya, or land of wealth. Of course, Krishna wanted the Gangavadi, so the rivalry between Krishna I of the Rashtrakutas and Sri Purusha of the Gangas was inevitable. Krishna probably believed that as a former feudatory of the Chalukyas, a peaceful and diplomatic agreement was not foremost on his mind. Sri Purusha, in anticipation of a Rashtrakuta attack, started to prepare the defense of the Gangavadi. One of the things he did was to set up a center of administration, maybe it was military headquarters, in Manne. Manne is short for Manyapura, and it's only a few kilometers outside Bangalore in Nelamangala. And then, in 768 AD, Krishna I attacked the Gangavadi. It's time for a commercial break, but when I come back, the battles between Sri Purusha and Krishna I. right after this.
Just how the North Star is the guiding light, the star of North Bangalore, Prestige Camden Gardens is a guiding light where your search for the perfect home ends. Prestige Camden Gardens, the star of North Bangalore. Step up to luxury with 3 and 4 BHK apartments on Tanisandra Main Road, 10 minutes from Manyata Tech Park, 25 minutes from the airport, and well connected with other parts of the city. Prestige Camden Gardens. Prices starting from 2.25 crore onwards. To know more, visit prestigeconstructions.com. RERA approved.
This clash between the Gangas and the Rashtrakutas was a drawn-out conflict that rocked the region for centuries. But in the moment, piecing together 3 pieces of data from stone inscriptions, we know that the battles between them were fought in Pinchanur, Kagemogiyur and Bagiyur. These are all locations that we can identify in the present-day Tumkur district. These battles were known as the Kannarasa Ballaha and claimed the lives of many brave warriors from the Ganga army. Among the generals who fell were Moorukode Anyar, the one with the 3 umbrellas, and Sri Ravarman, hailed as a lion among scholars, and they were all part of the band of heroes who fell in the battles of Pinchanur and Bagiyur. Sri Purusha's son Siagella, a renowned general who had once triumphed in battles against the Pallavas, also met his end. He was a skilled swordsman and celebrated as one of the greatest warriors of his time. He died in the battle of Kagemogiyur. An inscription found in the Madhugiri Taluk describes both the attack of the Rashtrakutas against the Gangavadi and the death of Siagella. Back in the battles, the question is always, who won these battles? And the answer is always a little imprecise, a little fuzzy, but the short version of this. Krishna of the Rashtrakutas did overrun Sri Purusha's forces. He got Sri Purusha to abandon his base Manne, and Krishna occupied the capital. And Krishna did release a set of plates commemorating the victory while he was camped at Mannanagara, the old name for Manne. So there is little doubt that the Gangas faced tremendous setbacks in these battles, lost a number of key senior people, including Sri Purusha's son, and many of these details are available from inscriptions carved on stone and found in Hiregundakal, a hamlet on the outskirts of Tumkur. So, by available evidence, the Rashtrakutas did defeat Sri Purusha, did occupy Manne, but what happened immediately afterwards raises other questions. Now, the Talegaon plates, those were what were issued by Krishna I, actually suggest an actual date by these words. In the year 600, increased by 90, of the Saka king in the year Plavanga, in the new moon day of Vaisakha, on the occasion of an eclipse of the sun. That's a long way of saying 14th April 768. So we know that Krishna left Manne that year, which means the battles we have been talking about could have lasted for as many as 4 years, somewhere between the years 762 and 767. Having lost Manne, Sri Purusha and the Ganga army withdrew to Manakunda near Channapatna, and Manakunda is the official residence of many of the Ganga kings. There are a plethora of inscriptions around these events, and by inference, we can tell that while Manne was lost, the Rashtrakutas did not have a free run of the Gangavadi, and several of the Ganga feudatories were present to thwart their progress. And then, suddenly one day, Krishna upped and left Manne, and he did not take possession of any of the Ganga territory. Why would Krishna I plan a subjugation of the Gangas, fight battles at different locations over years, win the war, and then a little less than a year, instead of pressing his advantage, simply abandon his post and return home? There are some possible explanations for this. The most credible reason appears to be a threat that they faced from the eastern or Bengi Chalukyas. Like their blood branch, the Vatapi Chalukyas, the Bengis too were close friends and relatives of the Gangas. So there may have been some saber rattling from them in support. In an earlier episode about Immadi Pulakesi, I spoke about the creation of the Vengi or the Eastern Chalukyas, that branch of the empire, and its independence. But to briefly cap all that, after capturing the Vengi territory, Immadi Pulakesi had appointed his brother Vishnuvardhana as viceroy to govern the newly conquered Andhra or Bengi region, and that was in 624 AD. By 631, Vishnuvardhana had completed the conquest and established some independence, marking the birth of the Eastern or the Bengi Chalukyas, a dynasty separate from the Badami Chalukyas but with the blessings of his brother. And now, about 150 years later, they were becoming an annoyance to the Rashtrakuta king Krishna I, who was presently preoccupied further south with the Ganga war. Now, Krishna I had a situation where he was present in Manne with his army, but the Gangas were not falling. His aggression had been checked, and the battle-hardened and well-blooded Gangas were without doubt going to regroup and come back at him. Holding Manne and expanding into capturing the rest of the Gangavadi would have been a major task in the best of circumstances, but now the all-too-real Bengi threat was demanding attention and resources. So it is likely that Krishna simply vacated the Nelamangala camp and returned home to focus on consolidating what he had already won. Now, it does not seem logical to assume that Krishna would have wanted to rule the Gangavadi hands-on. That would have consumed all his time. And that situation had some similarity in circumstances with how the Pallavas took Vatapi but showed no signs of wanting to administer it. What is logical is that Krishna probably wanted Sri Purusha to capitulate and agree to become a Rashtrakuta feudatory and make the peace. But the Gangas had resisted becoming feudatories even with the Vatapi Chalukyas, and so there was no likelihood that a peace treaty ever happened between Sri Purusha and Krishna I. So Krishna probably weighed his options and decided to leave, and that may have been a good strategic decision. He had won the first battle and set the stage for the area to become a theatre of repeated hostility in which the two sides would engage for centuries. Leaving Manne to Sri Purusha to reoccupy, Krishna marched out of the Nelamangala area and returned home to deal with the Bengi Chalukya problem. Now, without wasting any time, Krishna sent his son and successor, Govinda II, to deal with the Bengi threat. But how much of a threat did it turn out to be? Not much, it seems. The current ruler of the Bengis appears to have put up no resistance, and by one account, there was no battle at all. Now, the scene of this non-battle is quite picturesque, like most riverine areas of the south. The river Krishna, which is a natural border between the states of Andhra and Telangana today, flows northward to meet the Musi River with its confluence at Badapalli on the Telangana side. This is a little over 300 kilometers due west of the Rashtrakuta capital Manyaketa. So when Govinda was camped in this location, it is said that the ruler of Bengi came to him and surrendered, and by this, the Rashtrakutas had subjugated the eastern Chalukyas without a fight. That is the view of one historian. Others seem to say that there was a battle, and they reference the Alas plates, a prashasti that says that the victorious army of Govinda II had invaded the Bengi Mandala and that the king of Bengi was humbled by this cession of his treasury. No description of a battle. I imagine this is just as well, because the tales of Govinda II are not those of a warrior, but those of a playboy, a lover of women. So much that this reputation even made it to the inscriptions. And there's been the suggestion that he was so distracted by his philandering that he left the running of his kingdom to his younger brother Dhruva. But this theory was dismissed in reasonably strong terms by historian Jonathan Fleet. In his lengthy essay in Epigraphia Indica titled Some Records of the Rashtrakuta Kings of Malkhed, he puts forth the theory later embraced by Pandit Riu or Rao, I'm not sure how to say it, as a flight of fancy. It's worth quoting. Rising to the defense of Govinda II, Fleet wrote, "If indeed that statement could be looked upon as authoritative at all, it might be interpreted just as readily as meaning that Govinda II was so much engrossed in sensual pleasures that he was altogether indifferent about the sovereignty and deliberately allowed Dhruva to usurp it." And he goes on to say in the same piece, "And to a flight of fancy on the part of the composer of the draft that followed in the record, who, differing from the composers of some other drafts, thought it worthwhile to mention Govinda II and said about him the first thing that came into his head, sufficient to fill out a verse with some kind of suggestion as to why the succession passed on to the younger brother. It's quite hilarious. Anyway, so after Krishna I died in 774, did Govinda II become king before his younger brother took the throne? The conflicting theories say, number 1, no, the throne passed directly to Dhruva. Number 2, yes, he became king and later there was a succession battle with Dhruva. And 3, yeah, maybe he became king, but he was only a titular king. He was so engrossed in the good life that he left the administration of the kingdom to Dhruva. Well, the only thing we know for sure is that in 780 AD, Dhruva became the emperor of the Rashtrakutas following his brother Govinda II, and the time between Krishna I and Dhruva was unstable. And as you will see, the succession battle inside the Rashtrakuta kingdom becomes significant to how this history tangles with that of the Gangas. Meanwhile, in the Ganga dynasty, we are closing in on the end of the reign of Sri Purusha, who died in 788 AD. And less than a decade after the succession problems in the Rashtrakuta kingdom, there was trouble at home in the Gangavadi when the youngest son of Sri Purusha, Dugamara, decided to fight his brother Shivamara for the throne. And at this point, I make a full circle back to exactly where I left you in my series of the Gangas, Part 6, and the histories of the Deccan kingdoms start to merge. And things take an interesting turn at this point, because this is where we learn that the Pallavas, the bitter enemies of the Gangas, become fast friends. All that and more in my next episode, coming up very quickly. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.